Good morning, children. Today in Social Science and History in class 9, we'll continue the lesson Forest Society and Colonialism. We are aware of the fact that communities living in the forest use it in many ways. The 19th century, the growth of industries and urban centers, ships and railways created a new demand on the forest for timber and other forest products. So when these new demands were there, it led to new rules of forest use and forests came to be organized. The colonial control was established over the forest and forest areas were mapped, trees were classified and plantations were developed. So all these developments affected the lives of these local communities who used forest resources liberally earlier without any restriction. So obviously it had a great impact on the lives of the people and they had to reorganize their lives. So we see that when the forests were being destroyed rapidly, the British government appointed a German expert, Dietrich Brandis, who became the first Inspector General of Forests in India. Till now, there was no such designation at all. So, the British wanted his advice because he was an expert in all these matters. Why did they do that was the reason that the British were worried that the use of forests by local people and the reckless felling of trees, that is the cutting of trees by the people and by the traders, would destroy the forest completely. So Brandis realized that this way they would not be able to do anything regarding the forests. So he realized that a proper system had to be introduced. Why? To manage the forests, and people had to be trained how the forest can be conserved, and this could be done only when there was legal sanction, when rules would be framed and the rules would be framed regarding how the use of forest resources could be possible. So the British appointed this German expert, Dietrich Brandis, and he was the first Inspector General of Forests in India. And he brought about certain management and control over the forest resources. Felling of trees and grazing had to be restricted. So, how were these rules framed? That is, one is that they had to restrict the cutting of trees, the felling of trees, and grazing, which was done by the people earlier without any restriction, so that the forest could be preserved for timber production. Then those who did not follow the rules and the system and cut the trees, they had to be punished. So that is how they had to, you can say, bring about a proper system, manage the forests also, and prevent the people from reckless cutting of the trees. In 1864, now this was a major development. That is, in 1864, Brandis set up the Indian Forest Service, and in 1865, the Indian Forest Act was passed. So this was a major development. That is, in 1865, when the Indian Forest Act was passed. And the next year, that is in 1906, the Imperial Forest Research Institute was set up in Dehradun, what today we know as FRI, Forest Research Institute of India. So the system was called scientific forestry. And how was this introduced? Natural forests had lots of different types of trees, naturally, and were cut down, and in their place one type of tree was planted in straight rows. These were called as plantation. So how was this introduced? That is, naturally a forest would have all different types of trees and plants. So they had to be cut down and replaced by one type of tree in straight rows. This was called as plantation. There were forest officials who surveyed the forest and planned how much of the plantation was to be cut every year and replanted. So there was a proper system, a proper way of handling the forest so that they could grow more trees also and they could cut at the same time. So we see that the Forest Act of 1865 was amended twice. Once in 1878 and then in 1927. So the Indian Forest Act that was passed in 1865, it had two amendments, some modifications, that is, once was in 1878 and the other one was in 1927. Now the 1878 Act divided forests into three categories. These three categories were reserved forests, protected forests and village forests. Now reserved forests were the best forests. So they prevented the people from entering these reserved forests. And protected forests and village forests were there, which could be used by the villagers for building houses or fuel and all for the villagers. So they could take wood from there. So that is how the classification of the forest took place into these three categories: reserved forests, protected forests and village forests. Now, what was the effect of Forest Act on the lives of people? Naturally, there was a deep impact on the lives of the people, because till now, that is before the colonial control, they were free to go where they wanted to, get the wood from there and whatever else that they got from the forest. But now it was not possible for them. So after the implementation of the Forest Act, we see that people in the forest and villages began to experience a lot of difficulties. There were extreme hardships that they had to face, as they wanted fuel, fodder, leaves. So now there was restriction on their movement. The forest department wanted trees suitable for building ships or railways. And what kind of trees they required? They would require, that would give them hardwood, which would be tall and straight. So teak and sal trees were promoted and other trees were cut. So for their own requirement, the demand and requirement for building ships and railways, so they wanted such kind of trees only. So teak and sal were promoted. They were grown more in number, while the other trees were cut. Now in forest areas, people use many forest products like roots, leaves, fruits, tubers for food. So it was important that till now they were using all this. Then besides that, herbs are used for medicines, wood for agricultural implements, out of which they make yokes and plows for the farmers. Then bamboo, which is very good for making fences. Baskets and umbrellas are also made by them. So we see that. Then besides that, leaves which stitch together to make disposable plates and cups. Creepers are used to make ropes, oil for cooking and lighting lamps. So all these products, all these resources are what the people were able to procure very easily earlier. They could go where they wanted to and with all the freedom. After the act, that is the act of the 1865, that is the Indian Forest Act, traditional activities of forest communities like cutting wood for homes, fuel, grazing by the cattle, collecting fruits and roots, hunting, all these became illegal. That meant that now they were not permitted to do all that. They did not have the liberty which they enjoyed earlier. So they had to follow all the rules that were framed by the British, and these activities now became illegal. So obviously their difficulties multiplied. Now in order to get wood, obviously they needed to cook food also, and they used wood for that purpose. So they would creep into the woods. If they were caught stealing, then the forest guards would compel them to give them bribe, give them money, So, in many ways, these forest guards harassed the people over there as the rules had been framed and they were not permitted to enter the areas now freely. Thank you.